Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I don't want to leave any dye behind. I have some leftover Dharma acid dyes, dye powders in some brilliant yellow, Peacock blue, and fire engine red that I used for a project. And right now I'm just sort of braiding up this 100% Peruvian Highland wool roving. This is Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Roving. And yeah, we are going to put this in a leftover dye bath, low immersion that has plenty of acid, sort of sprinkle on these powders. We'll dissolve the rest of the powder, add that to the mix. Honestly, I think that we're going to get something really, really fun. Since we are dealing with dye powders today, I am wearing a respirator mask, safety glasses, and when I'm about to touch the dyes, I'll put gloves back on. The dye pot is hot. I literally just removed a yarn mop from it. And to it, I'm going to add some brown. I guess it's a reddish brown. It is a mixture of color that I rinsed off of the spoons throughout filming today. And now I'm coming in with our non-pre-soaked Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn. I added the braid that was not pre-soaked to the pot and let it slowly sink in and absorbing some of that color. I like the way that this absorbed. It's a very pretty sort of rose red color. And now, honestly, I'm coming in with some of this dye powder. And with this one, because it was mostly gone, I'm just actually tapping it there. The heat is still off. We will come back in with some more of the residual color in a little bit. Am I going to end up using all of the color? Gee, I don't know. I like the way that these specks are sort of spreading out onto the fiber. And, I mean, I haven't used nearly all of this yet. But that looks so cool. Oh man. I don't want to like go in too heavy, but I am enjoying this effect immensely. Okay, let's bring in the red. And we're gonna do the same kind of thing. I think the milling of the colors is a little different. It's a lot easier for me to get like a nice fine speckle with that blue than it is with this red color. I'm curious if we'll even like see the speckles, or then like as you go and fluff out the fiber, if that might sort of hide it, because I want to add more color, but I like what has happened so far. So you could see me being really torn right now, but let's come in at least with a little more of this yellow, and we'll come in some pops, but along mostly that one side of the yarn. I am way too curious. I liked the way that the blues sort of streaked through, but the reds, okay, it's because the reds haven't dissolved yet. You can kind of see on the spoon that they have those flecks, and that's why I think they're looking a little bit more like speckles right now on the yarn, just because they haven't dissolved. I wonder if I can flip this. How warm is it? This is where I'm torn. Okay, I'm going to try to flip it. I got a lot of color. I want to add some to the other side. Ooh, that's cool looking. I don't want to felt it, but we just attempted to flip this over, it did definitely average out some of that color that we had going on, but it's also kind of pretty. Clearly not all of these colors are going to penetrate all the way to the center of the wool, and there's some resist in these chains themselves, but some of the color might go towards the center. I'm curious what this will look like, and I really, really hope I do not felt it. Really, really, really hope. Okay, now I'm coming in with some red. And the red is almost done. It's the blue that definitely has some more life to it. And in fact, here is a little bit of a red slurry that I just poured into the center. I really like what's happening in the pot, and I'm now going to turn the heat on low. As for this leftover blue color, I'm going to dissolve this in some water and set it aside, and we'll do another leave no dye behind something at the end of this video.
Ooh, we got a lot of dye in there. Let's add some vinegar. The heat is low, and I know that's a lot of vinegar. The issue is that some of the colors have not like dissolved into water, and I don't want to like shimmy it. So I'm just gonna leave this like this, and we're gonna be patient and we're gonna wait. But yeah, I'll peek back in 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, we can see that some of that water has cleared. I don't want to mess around with anything. It's looking pretty cool. I'm going to turn off the heat and let this cool completely and slowly in the pot. I am tempted to come in and poke with a spoon and see, but I also feel like I can physically see a few specks that have not dissolved. So we're just gonna be patient. It's taking a lot of restraint, but we're gonna be really patient here. Okay, it is the next morning, and let's see. I'm being very gentle. Okay, that's why I should have worn gloves. There's definitely dye that did not dissolve that I'm gonna need to wash out. The dye actually came off my hands pretty well because I just went and washed them, but do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, there's a hint of color in here. I'm expecting that we're gonna have to rinse out some of that dye that just didn't dissolve the first time, but I'm also feeling a little optimistic about this color. I see maroon and deep blue, almost some navies, and I know there's gonna be some yellow and pops of yellow in there, which I think is cool, and then white. This is fun. This is really, really fun. Here is another leftover dye bath that I just started heating up. This dye bath was also leftover from the same video, just a separate pot. And I'm gonna add in our blue dye, which you can see is not mixed up really well. I believe that the Peacock blue is not one of my favorites for having dye stalks because I think it just doesn't stay in solution very well. If I remember correctly, I think that the Jacquard Brilliant Blue does a better job, but this will, as the dye pot heats up, go into solution pretty well. I'm just going to stir it a bit. The dye bath is currently cool. I was going to add the yarn, but for those clumps. Some vigorous stirring later. I think most of it has dissolved. I can no longer easily see the bottom of the pot. I now want to dip in some Knit Pick Swish DK yarn, which I have dry and folded in half. So like the two ends are going to go in at the same time and my middles are in my hands. I'm not dip dyeing exactly because this yarn is dry, but we're going to add these ends first. The goal isn't to do dip dyed, the goal is more for a tonal, but I thought that it would be fun to input the yarn in this way. The yarn is 100% superwash merino, so it will absorb the color fairly quickly. I think that there is a fair amount of acid in here already, and you can see just from that short period of time the difference in pigmentation from some of those ends and middle parts. Wow, that struck fast. The dry yarn allows for a bit more tonal variation as well, but you can see the water is just starting to get warm. We're not yet hot, and we have almost absorbed all of that blue color. This looks like a tangled mess. I'm not particularly worried about tangles. That's one of the reasons why I did add the nylon zip tie on here. And in case I didn't mention it, this is a dedicated dye pot that's never used for food. All of the tools and equipments we're using aren't used for food. And with acid dyes like we're using today, you need a protein-based fiber. Wool, alpaca, silk, nylon works, but this won't work on cotton or acrylic. But anyway, now I'm gonna let this sit for, goodness, I think 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and check on it. While we are using up the rest of that dye, we are gonna start carefully washing our roving. And we know from when I was touching my hands that there is some unbound dye in here. But look at that orange. I'm not seeing a ton of color rinse out of here. What I am seeing, and I think that what we felt was crocking. That is when you might have some dye that's a little bit on the surface, it's not bound to the yarn, and it kind of comes off or solidifies. It's not something that is great. It's not something that is horrible though either. Yeah, there might be a tiny bit of some pink coming off, sort of like what we saw left in the pot. But at this point, I want to add a little bit of some dish soap, sudsing that up, and then we're going to add our roving, gently letting it soak up. The washing stage with roving is where I want to be the most careful. I try as much as possible to not let the running water go over the roving, and you don't want to rub it because that's when you will get the felting. Some gentle movement in the pot is not going to cause felting. Felting comes with the heat and agitation, and the fibers are most vulnerable in at the loosest form when they're hot for that agitation issue. And we are seeing some bleeding. So when I'm squeezing out the liquid each time, I'm trying to press versus twist or rub. But we are going to go through a number of different dips and washes to try to get the color to stop bleeding, and I will check back in. Okay, 2 rinses later, some gentle presses, and yeah, I'm not really seeing any more color coming out. So I'm now going to take this roving, put it through my spin dryer to spin out the excess water, and then hang it to dry. After 20 minutes, I am going to turn off the heat, and we're going to remove the yarn. There's actually a hint of blue left, but I'm not going to worry about that. We will set the yarn aside, let it cool completely, and then we can go wash it. Let's go ahead and wash our DK weight yarn. It might look a little tangled, and if you're afraid it's tangled, don't worry. Wait until the yarn is dry and then try to reorder it. It is a lot easier then. But again, I'm going to use a little bit of some dish soap. The only reason why I go for clear over a colored dish soap is so that way I can show you guys whether or not we're seeing any bleeding, and we are not. So into the spin dryer we will go, and I'll come back with some conclusions. Okay everyone, I want to show you what this beautiful blue tonal yarn looks like, but uh-oh, it's a little tangled. So the first thing that I would do if I have a zip tie on it is try to arrange the strands by the zip tie. But you can see here that things are a little twisted, and so I'm going to try to look at these strands where they are, and now that it's dry, I can sort of untwist it a little bit easier. And honestly, this one was not horribly tangled by any stretch, but by looking at your zip tie, which is a good place to start, the ties on the yarn are also a good place to start, and you can look and make sure, okay, is all the yarn passing through the tie in the correct direction, or for example, is a strand flipped the wrong way? And so then you can go and flipping them the right way and snapping the yarn to get it set up beautifully. Okay, so we've got our beautiful yarn, which you just saw, but here is our fiber. We've got these deep raspberry with hints of blue on the front, and you can see a few pops of yellow towards the back. Okay, and now I'm going to open this up so that way we can see the full colorway. And I'm seeing hints of yellow, a couple subtle hints of green, a little orange, and we've definitely got purple and that raspberry color in here. This yarn was 100% wool, and I think we might have a little bit of some light felting going on here, but the fiber is going to be really, really easy to fluff up. I think the light felting that we do have here is definitely a result. You can see that this yarn is fluffing back up really easily. I think that that light felting that we do have is a result from the washing more than the technique. Whenever you are washing roving, you want to proceed with caution, because that is where I find the real risk of felting can take place. And so what made this washing different from other ones? And it's not the spin dryer. That's not where the issue came into play. I think that the issue here in this time was because I used so much dry powder on the roving. And since the powder was dry, it didn't necessarily all dissolve, and therefore we had some bleeding and therefore some light felting. So what should you do if you have some bleeding with your roving? Well, if you're planning on spinning it yourself, honestly, you can stop, spin the yarn, and then work on oh, look at that yellow. Work on washing the yarn and getting that excess dye out once you are setting the twist on the yarn that you spun. That is definitely something that you can do, and something that I recommend. But again, this is easily, you see that with just, how long have I been doing this? A minute or two, I've been able to fluff this up. And there's no doubt in my mind that I would be able to draft this with ease. This roving does almost feel like two colorways. One half feels a little more rainbow, a little more red and warm toned, and the other half is more cool toned, more purple and blue. But I think that this will spin up to be something so pretty. Since we do have some white patches in here, the depth of shade will be a bit reduced as that white blends in with these other colors. But you could spin this as more of a gradient, or you could get more of a repeating kind of variegated colorway from what you spin. And so there's a lot of potential here in this colorway. This roving is so stunning. And I absolutely want to play around with this technique more. But I think I prefer using liquid dyes on roving versus powder. I mean, I'm excited by what we created with the powder, but the rinsing just makes me nervous. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you all appreciate that the magic that we can create when we leave no dye behind. There are so many different techniques that you can do with leftover dye, just like when you're pre-planning and measuring out colors or not measuring out colors, a colorway. But there really isn't a reason to not use up dye that you have left over. I do want to step back and acknowledge that I am privileged to have a lot of bare yarn at my disposal. So I'm able to play and create these random fun colorways where I let the colors really speak and drive the way that I'm creating color. And I'm able to do this thanks to all of you and all of your support. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for supporting my journey in playing with color. If your fiber resources are more limited, you can save leftover dye for a while. If it's dye powder, save it in a Ziploc bag until you're ready to use it again. Or if it's liquid dye, again, save it in a closed container. So you don't need to necessarily use it right away. If you love the yarn I dye and want to bring some home, go and check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. There's also a link to that in the video description and other places where you can find me to help support the ChemKnits brand as a whole. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching, everyone.